let's move to CRQ number 1. Some of you guys I've never seen before, so I want to make sure we're all on the same page. Every time you get a CRQ, the first question is going to be about this: circumstances. What's the question asking when it's asking about circumstances? What led to it, right? So what happened in the world that led to the moment being shown in this document? So let's talk about it. Robert Ley held several positions in Germany. He was Reich organization leader responsible for much of internal party education. He was also head of the German Labor Front, the Nazi Union. This speech was given on November 3rd, 1936. So the guy is a Nazi in Germany in 1936. Did World War II start yet? No, right? So it's just before World War II. So a German point of view about, a Nazi point of view about Germany just before World War II. We have accomplished enormous things in the over 3 years that we have been in power. I do not believe this evening would be long enough to list all the great successes that we have had. 2 facts stand out. The German today has become an entirely different person. Whether worker, craftsman, farmer, or member of the middle class, we are all entirely new people. There are a few holdovers from past times. There always have to be museum pieces after all. They will gradually die out. The broad, large, and great mass of our people has changed thoroughly. They have been transformed. So is he saying that Germans are doing well right here or not well? Well. Yeah, looks like they're doing pretty good in 1936. Interesting. Germany has been born anew. The Führer, it's a German word for leader, which is Hitler in this context, right? Said at the last party rally, as he always says, that for him the greatest miracle of the age is how people have changed. Once there was hopelessness, today there is joy and affirmation. Once there was general desperation, today there is resurrection and reawakening. Once each was the enemy of his neighbor. Envy, mistrust, and hatred were everywhere. Today everyone tries to do something good for the next person, even if it's sometimes with too much energy and enthusiasm. Each wants to be a good comrade, loyal, and friendly. This is super hard. So you have to ask yourself, what led to this moment in the 1930s where Germany is just like kicking butt? Can we backtrack and talk about some previous events that would explain why in 1936 Germany is doing really well? Any ideas? Let's go back in time to 1919. Tell me what happens to Germany in 1919. That's right after World War I. Tell me about Germany with the Treaty of Versailles. Let's write it down. This is super important, Treaty of Versailles. I'd say it's probably on 9 out of 10 Regents exams. Tell me how Germany was affected by the Treaty of Versailles. They had to pay money, right? What's the buzzword for the Germans having to pay money? Reparations, right? Germany had to pay reparations. Yep. Germany lost land, lost its colonies. Reparations means money for repairs, right? So they had to pay the British and the French money to help rebuild Western Europe. Okay, reduced the military. Excellent, right? I'll put submarines in. You're right. They weren't even allowed to have submarines anymore. Good call, right? And that goes back to World War I when they were just using unrestricted submarine warfare. Good memory. There was one more thing. It wasn't like a physical punishment. It wasn't about money or colonies, but they made the Germans accept something. What were the Germans forced to accept? That Germany was responsible for what? Yes, Germans blamed for World War I. They were forced to accept full responsibility for World War I. And if you're a German person, this was a slap in the face. Because do you guys remember any of the causes for World War I? Right, a Serbian guy killed an Austrian guy. And now we're blaming Germany in full for World War I. Right, so this is something that really irritated the Germans. They hated their new government for signing this because it made the Germans really, really weak. So that's 1919. But 1936, it's all different. So what the heck happened that explains why we have this horrible situation, but then this? What had to have happened? Okay, maybe some industrialization, definitely, right? So you have the rise of the Nazis, and what did the Nazis promise to do? That's why they became popular. What were they promising? To rebuild, reunify the German people, make them strong again. So what is something Hitler did to make the Germans strong again? Exactly. They said, forget all this, and they start putting people to work building submarines, building planes, making guns. thereby violating the Treaty of Versailles. But that's what put Germans back to work, and that's why they're happy now. Does that make any sense? Hopefully a little bit. So what would be a good way to start this answer? Let's assume we're going to use full sentences on the regions. How would you guys start this? Rob? That would work, yeah. Or you could keep it even simpler if you don't remember that. You could say, one historical circumstance that led to the developments described in the excerpt was. Okay, so for the sake of time, I won't write all of that down. I'll just leave off with was. And maybe we say, was that Hitler rose to power on the promise of restoring Germany to being, it says being, a world power. Okay, so that is something that happens before the document. What I would recommend trying to do is connect the prior event to something that is seen in this source. So here's where I'll explain how he basically turned Germany into being a successful country again, right? So I'll say he did this by, just like Rob said, defying, meaning going against, the Treaty of Versailles and rearmed Germany, which provided many job opportunities, right? Because that's why people in the source are saying, oh, we have hope now. Things are good. Things are looking up for the German people. That's all great and wonderful, but the reason why that's the case is he broke international law, right? All the countries of the world decided that you can't do these things. And he said, try and stop me. And remember, no one did, right? They kept appeasing him. And eventually we have World War II. So we move to document 2. And this document, this exact document in question, my students actually have seen this one before, okay? And it's talking about the Nuremberg Trials. What I like to do when I get a CRQ or even like an Enduring Issues document, I try to remember everything I know about that idea or that event before I read it, because I think then it'll help me understand it a little bit better. Do you guys remember anything about the Nuremberg Trials before we even look at this? Like maybe what event caused it or what happened at the event? World War II caused it. Holocaust caused it. So we're putting the Nazi leaders on trial for all the bad things they did in World War II, whether that was genocide or breaking international laws like the Treaty of Versailles. Beautiful, right? So some of those Nazis got like the death penalty, some of them got life sentences. It was basically designed to send a message to the world that you can't behave that way, right? You cannot just go and try to annihilate an entire religious group from the planet. So let's take a look, because this is a very hard question. So I want to make sure we understand how to respond to this. The Nuremberg Trials were held from November 20th, 1945 to October 1st, 1946. Judges and prosecutors from the Allied powers, Great Britain, France, the Soviet Union, and the United States presided over the hearings of 22 Nazi officials. The proceedings were observed by 325 newspaper, radio, and newsreel correspondents from 23 countries. That is a heck of a lot of people that are probably going to hear about this. The fact of the war and the course of the war, which is the central theme of our case, is history. From September 1st, 1939, which is when World War II began, that's when Hitler invaded Poland, when the German armies crossed the Polish frontier, until September 1942, when they met epic resistance at Stalingrad. That's when the Russians started pushing back. Maybe your teacher told you about Stalingrad. German arms seemed invincible, meaning for a good 3 years or so, no one could stop the Germans. Denmark and Norway, the Netherlands and France, Belgium and Luxembourg, the Balkans and Africa, Poland and the Baltic states, and parts of Russia, all had been overrun and conquered by swift, powerful, well-aimed blows, meaning the Germans are just going after everybody. That attack on the peace of the world is the crime against international society, which brings into international cognizance, meaning understanding, crimes in its aid and preparation, which otherwise might only be internal concerns. It's a really confusing way of saying Germany violated international law and violated a lot of different countries, right? They didn't just abuse their own people, they abused the people of a lot of countries in Europe. That makes this far worse than it would have been otherwise, perhaps. It was aggressive war, which the nations of the world had renounced, meaning the countries said they were never going to be violent ever again. It was war in violation of treaties by which the peace of the world was sought to be safeguarded. Right? So that treaty he's referring to here is the Treaty of Versailles that Hitler is violating. This war did not just happen, it was planned and prepared for over a long period of time and with no small skill and cunning. The world has perhaps never seen such a concentration and stimulation of the energies of any people as that which enabled Germany 20 years after it was defeated, disarmed, and dismembered to come so near carrying out its plan to dominate Europe. A lot of words there. Basically just calling out Germany for being evil, horrible. It's amazing that they were able to do so much damage only 20 years after it got beat in World War I. Pretty insane. So the question, and these are really hard, and they don't come up that often. And when they do, it kind of causes people to go, oh my God, because these are difficult. Explain how audience affected what the lawyer included in his opening statement. If you guys know about court proceedings, usually what happens is a lawyer gets in front of the judge and the jury and says why the guilty person is here, right? Gives a bunch of evidence and supporting details about the crimes they committed because they're trying to convince a jury of all the bad stuff that they've done. So explain how audience affected what he included. So we have to know some stuff here, right? We have to know what's going on, right? So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to take some notes. You guys should write the same thing down. The context of this moment is that it's a court proceeding, right? There's a trial happening here. Maybe that's something worth knowing. And maybe we should know that the person was acting as a prosecutor. This is tough because you have to know a little bit about, that says prosecutor. That's a U-T-O-R. Let me just rewrite it. Prosecutor. Do you guys know what the job of a prosecutor is in a court proceeding? Yeah, they're trying to prove guilt, right? Generally speaking, we have a system of innocent to proven guilty. Their job of the prosecutor, how do I know he was the prosecutor? Right? It basically says the jury is there, right? So I'm going to write some notes here for audience. So who's in the audience? We've got the jury in the audience, perhaps, if it's a trial. Who else is in the audience, right? The judge is in the audience. The witnesses, perhaps some Jewish people as well, right? Since this was such a huge trial, news media was reporting on it, right? Countries from all around the world were tuned in to try to hear about this case. But usually, right, when a lawyer is speaking to a jury, you have to ask yourself, what is a jury interested in hearing about, right? They want to hear about the facts of the case. They want to hear why I should convict this person of these crimes, right? They want to be convinced of something. So what kinds of things is this person talking about that might convince a jury to find the Germans guilty? Like, what's one example of the Holocaust, perhaps, right? I'm not sure, like, he mentions it specifically in the source, but that is something that they might be interested in. But what other bad thing did Germany do that's stressed in this source? Violating treaties, right? Breaking international laws. So watch what I'm going to do here, right? I'm going to say audience affected Robert Jackson's opening statement by. Okay, so I'm kind of restating the question here. Audience affected Robert Jackson's opening statement by encouraging the discussion of ways Germany broke the law, comma, such as violating international treaties. Okay, so all I did here was I determined in my head who the audience is, and I just asked myself, what is that audience interested in hearing about? Right, the audience is the jury. The jury is interested in what are the facts that I'm supposed to hear or know to prove this guy guilty. So that's what he's stressing in his statement to the jury is all the bad things. Right? He's not saying any of the good things, not that there were any good things, but he's not mentioning any of the potential positives of German behavior, only the negatives. Right? This guy's talking about the positives of what Hitler did. He's like, oh, I got to find Hitler guilty. I got to find the Nazis guilty of things. I'm going to stress all the bad things, right? Because the audience wants to hear about what he did wrong. Does that make any kind of sense? That's a really hard kind of question, right? So my recommendation when you get audience questions, ask yourself, who is the audience, meaning who's listening to what's going on or seeing what's going on, and what is that group of people interested in hearing about? Because the author is going to want to appeal to that audience. Here's a more simple example that's outside of social studies. I say this with my guys, right? Imagine a world where, like, I was invited to give a speech at Yankee Stadium about the best baseball teams of all time. Who's my audience at Yankee Stadium? Which fans? Yankee fans, right? If I'm at Yankee Stadium, most of my audience is Yankees fans. So you have to ask yourself, what would that audience be interested in hearing about, right? Because I want to make them happy. I don't want people throwing things at me. So what am I going to say in my speech if I'm delivering it to Yankees fans about the best baseball teams ever? I'm going to say how the Yankees are the best, right? The 1998 Yankees were the best baseball team of all time. 1927, 1961 Yankees, great teams. Who am I saying is trash? Mets and Red Sox, right? Why? Because my audience is Yankees fans, and Yankees fans want to hear that the Yankees are good. Does that make any kind of sense? Ask yourself who the audience is and what they want to hear. The audience here is a jury. What does a jury want to hear about? The bad things that happened that I'm supposed to listen to prove somebody guilty. Does that make sense, hopefully? So that's all I did here, okay? And I think this is one of the hardest questions on a CRQ that the Regents has ever had. I hope you guys don't get one of those, but be prepared, just in case. Usually the second question in a CRQ set is either purpose or point of view. Those are a lot easier, okay? I hope you guys get one of those 1 week from today. Getting close. All right, so let's take a look at the last one. Always the third one, it's going to ask you to do one of three things. It's going to ask you about cause and effect, or it might ask you about similarity or difference, or it might ask you about turning point. And that's the one that doesn't come up very often. Turning point basically meaning what happened between the documents that shifted the course of history. But this is a cause and effect one. I think these are fairly easy. And the way I like to think about these, if you've never heard me go through this before, is I like to ask myself, how did the first one lead to the second one, and explain it? And the first thing you want to do, you got to do two things. You first have to identify the relationship. How do you do that? What I like to do is, and tell my kids to do, is state the main idea from document 1 and how that led to the main idea in document 2. So remind me, this will get clear in a second. Remind me, what's the main idea of document number 1? Germany became more free and more powerful, right? Things were looking up for Germany. What's the main idea of document 2? Bad things Germany did, right? Breaking the Treaty of Versailles. So watch what I do. I'm going to start with the main idea from document 1. So I'm going to say the rise of Germany as a world power, because that's what I believe to be the main idea from document 1. Rise of Germany as a world power eventually led to, and here's where I'll drop the main idea from document number 2, led to its leaders being put on trial for committing crimes. Okay, so again, all I did with that first sentence is main idea from document 1 led to main idea from document 2. Now I've gotten half of this done, right? I did the identify part. Now I have to explain. Right, so you have to ask yourself, okay, well, how is that possible? And I think you have to include some of the stuff we said down here to make this explanation full. Right, so how did Germany's rise eventually lead to them getting into trouble? Put it all together for me. And they broke the treaty, right, by rearming Germany, putting people back to work, building tanks, airplanes, submarines. So the rest of my statement here, which this whole thing, guys, should be like no more than 3 sentences. They don't want you to fill this whole thing up. That'd be ridiculous. You could get this done 2 to 3 sentences tops. So now I'm going to explain. So I'll say, while Hitler was rebuilding Germany, he did so by breaking the terms of the Versailles Treaty. Again, forgive my handwriting. It's already bad and I'm trying to go really fast. And by starting the Holocaust. This led to an effort to defeat Germany and punish it for its crimes. Okay, 3 sentences. I identified main idea from 1, led to main idea from 2, and I threw in an explanation. I put the whole picture together. All right, CRQ set number 2 from the January 23 Regents. So poem number 1, well, document number 1 is a poem entitled War Girls, published in England in 1916, and just like before, historical circumstances again. Sometimes it's geographic circumstances. The only difference is you tell me how the land influenced the document. This is how did the history influence the document. There's the girl who clips your ticket for the train, and the girl who speeds the lift from floor to floor. There's the girl who does a milk round in the rain, and the girl who calls for orders at your door. Strong, sensible, and fit, they're out to show their grit and tackle jobs with energy and knack. I could stop here for the sake of our exercise. What are girls doing in England in 1916 according to this poem? They're working, right? They're out in the world working. They're working for the railroad company. They're working operating elevators, which, believe it or not, was not an automated thing back then. They delivered milk, because people used to get milk deliveries back in the old days. So the question is, what led to the role that women played, meaning the role of being out in the workplace? And the year is 1916, and the country is England. What do you think? World War I is going on. So explain the connection to me. How does World War I lead to this? The men go fighting. The women have to work in the factories to make all the stuff for the war, right? The idea of Rosie the Riveter is like this, but that's World War II stuff, but the same concept, right? So that's all it is. So let's write that down, right? Usually I like to start my answer with like rephrasing the question, but for the sake of time, I'll just skip that for now. I'll just say, I'll start with what happened. Britain declared war on Germany, and many of its men went to go fight. Okay, so that is the event that happens before, but you should try to make some kind of connection, right? Explain how this actually leads to it. So I'll say, this led to women having to enter the workplace, fill the jobs that the men left behind. We could say it like that. Okay, what I did with this, guys, I did for the sake of time. I would encourage you on the actual Regents to read the whole document. Okay, I just knew what it was about already, so I stopped right here because I've done this before, but make sure you read the whole thing a week from today. All right, so 2-sentence answer is all you need. All right, so a point of view question. What does point of view mean?
Perception.
Perception, yeah, feeling, opinion, stuff like that. All right, so we've got the German National Socialist Women's League, thank you, was created in 1931. In 1936, Emily Muller-Zadow, a member of the National Socialist Women's League, wrote this essay. So one thing I would recommend is when you see German National Socialists, what is a simple expression for that group of people? Do you guys remember? They were the Nazis, yes. The German National Socialist group, National Socialism, that's the Nazis. Okay, so a Nazi wrote this essay in 1936. Okay? So let's just predict, as good readers do. If a Nazi is writing something down, and I ask you what is her feeling about the Nazis, is she going to say nice things about Nazis or bad things? Probably nice things, right? So we're going to have to figure out what her feeling is, or her opinion about motherhood. What does motherhood mean?
When you have a child.
Yeah, when you have a child, when you are a mom, basically. All right, so let's see. There is a growing recognition that the mothers carry the destiny of their people in their hands, and that the success or ruin of the nation depends on their attitude toward the vocation of motherhood. A very complicated way of saying that the success of the country depends on mothers being good mothers. Okay, success or ruin of the nation depends on the vocation, meaning the job, of motherhood. Nation and race are facts of creation, which we too are called upon to share in forming and preserving. There is a national leadership that respects and honors its mothers, is on a sound and healthy path. Okay, so they're saying that we're going to honor the mothers here. Interesting. The place that Adolf Hitler assigns to women in the Third Reich, that's what he called his German Empire, corresponds to her natural and divine destiny. Limits are being set for her, meaning we're going to put limits on the moms, which earlier she had frequently violated in a barren desire to adopt masculine traits. So the German people are saying, we're not going to let the women behave like men anymore, kind of implying that maybe they're not going to be allowed to go out and get a job anymore. The value and sanctity of goals now being set for her have been unrecognized and forgotten for a long time, and due respect is now being offered to her vocation as mother of the people, in which she can and should develop her rich emotions and spiritual strength according to eternal laws. The wake-up call of National Socialism to women is one more indication that in Germany today, it is not arbitrary laws that are being issued, but rather a nation is returning to essential, eternal rules of order. Kind of, it's confusing, I know, but he's implying there that it's only natural for women to be in the home and raise good kids. So I think for the sake of this, we could probably pause here and get a sense of how the author, which is interesting because it is a woman, how the author feels about being a mom. And we should always go above, she thinks it's good being a mom or bad being a mom. So what is her opinion about the position of being a mom? It's very important. Let's try to build on it. Why is it important, according to the author? Okay, right? It's going to basically determine the success of the entire nation. So let's put that down, right? So we'll say the point of view of the German National Socialist Women's League, it's a lot to write, regarding motherhood was that it was important because children may determine the success of the whole nation. Okay? That's all we really need to do here. I don't need to say, like some of you guys know, I like to use the phrase, this could be inferred from a source when it states. I don't have to do that here because we already included what the source stated. So I don't have to worry about that, right? The only time I have to do that is if maybe I said my first sentence was something like, the point of view was that moms were important, right? Then I would have to maybe go further in explaining that in my second sentence. I don't have to do that here because I just built that all into one sentence. That's all. All right, so the third question in this CRQ is similarity difference, which I think is the easiest out of all of them. I think cause and effect is okay. Turning point is probably the hardest, but I think similarity difference is the easiest. So we'll practice that in a second. Okay, so let's take a look. Be careful with these because they look just like the cause and effect. There are two things you have to do. You have to identify and then explain. And notice how it says similarity or a difference. Don't do both. Because if you do both, they're just going to grade the first one anyway. So don't waste your time and energy. Okay? So you have to ask yourself, were those two documents similar or were they different? That's the easy part. What jumps out at you? Similar ideas or different ideas? I agree. How are they different? Yeah, right? The difference is document 1 talks about women going out into the workplace and getting jobs. Document 2 talks about the need for women to stay at home and be mothers. Kind of like exact opposites. So I'm going to, in my first part of my answer, state that they're different, and I'm going to say how they were different. Right? I'll say the documents are different because while the British, which is document 1, supported the idea of women in the workplace, the Germans, so comma, the Germans, wanted to keep women at home to serve only as mothers. Okay? So what I just did was the first part with that first sentence. It's a long first sentence, but I checked off part A. And now what I recommend doing to explain is give an example from each document that supports the claim. Right? The claim is that they're different because of these reasons. Now I have to give proof. Right? So I'll say, for example, in Doc 1, women are shown working on the railroad. Right? That's something I took from the document. We saw that in the first paragraph. In Doc 1, women were working on the railroad, while in Doc 2, women referred to as, quote, the mother of the people. Okay, so where did I get this from? I got both of these things, the railroad and the mother of the people. I got those from the documents. That's document 1 evidence. This is document 2 evidence. So I did both of those things. I stated that they were different. I said how they were different. And I gave an example of the differences. Not too bad, right? That's pretty easy.